Okay, so back to naming these special ratios. We're going to go for 60 degrees here. So the sine of 60 degrees is the opposite over the hypotenuse. Opposite over the hypotenuse. Good. No rationalizing denominator needed. The cosine of 60 degrees is equal to the adjacent over the hypotenuse, that's 1/2. The tangent of 60 degrees, that's equal to the opposite over the adjacent, that's the square root of 3 over 1. All those are nice and easy, or the square root of 3 by itself. Right. Now, I'm going to leave a little space, and then I'm going to go for the cotangent of 60 degrees. And that's going to be the reciprocal of the tangent, which is, if this is the square root of 3 over 1, its reciprocal would be 1 over the square root of 3. But remember, by convention, we need to rationalize this denominator. So what do we multiply by? Well, square root of 3 times the square root of 3 would make it not irrational, right? It would make it not a square root anymore. So we'll multiply by the square root of 3 and the square root of 3. I'll get the square root of 3 over 3. And that is the cotangent. Now, how about the secant of 60 degrees? Okay. Now it's the reciprocal of 1/2, which is 2. Easy enough. And now the cosecant of 60 degrees. It's the reciprocal of the square root of 3 over 2. That's 2 over the square root of 3. Then we need to multiply by the square root of 3 in the numerator and denominator. What's that going to leave us? Square root of 3 times the square root of 3 is 3. 2 times the square root of 3 is 2 times the square root of 3. Okay, so we've done all the work there. So now what I want us to see is, I'll grab a different colored marker. Okay. We've also done a bunch of work already for another angle. And let's see, what I'm talking about there. So for this one, we did the sine of 60. We did the opposite side over the hypotenuse. Okay, that was in relation to 60 degrees. Now look at 30 degrees. 30 degrees, there's a ratio that you also take the square root of 3 over 2, but what's that called for 30 degrees? For 30 degrees, this isn't the opposite side like it was for 60. It's the side next to it is the adjacent side. It's the adjacent over the hypotenuse. So the adjacent over the hypotenuse is called the cosine. So this is also the value of the cosine for 30 degrees. Okay? So what I'm going to go through here and do that for all of these. All right? So what I'm going to do is go through and say, well, we took this side over that side for the 60 degrees, and let's see what that is in relation to 30 degrees. Right? So the cosine was cosine of 60 was the adjacent over the hypotenuse. Well, this is not the adjacent side of 30. It's the opposite side of 30. The opposite over the hypotenuse for 30, that's the sine of 30. Right? The tangent of 60 was the opposite over adjacent. But for 30, that was the adjacent over the opposite. That's the reciprocal of the tangent. So that's the cotangent of 30 degrees. Come over to the cotangent. Well, this cotangent was just the reciprocal of this tangent, and since this is the cotangent, the reciprocal would be the tangent of 30 degrees, right? This one right here was the adjacent, for 60, adjacent over opposite, but for 30, that's the opposite over adjacent, which is the tangent. For the secant is the hypotenuse over the adjacent, okay? So that was for 60 degrees, it was the hypotenuse over the adjacent. But for 30 degrees, it's still the hypotenuse, but it's over the opposite. The hypotenuse over the opposite is the cosecant. Right? Remember, when we go across, this is another way we could look at it, just the way that I've structured it here. As we look across, we made the things to the right of these things be the reciprocal ones. So if this is the cosine of 30, this would be the reciprocal of the cosine. The reciprocal of the cosine is the secant. Okay? So there we have 30 and 60, all 6 of the ratios for 30 and 60. We also did for 45 earlier. So those are 3 special angles that come up quite often and you should commit those to memory. Later on you'll have the unit circle. The unit circle will be very helpful in helping you remember these values. Okay, so we'll do some practice problems in the next video.